What if everything you owned, every memory, every piece of your family's story, was about to be erased with a single signature? Imagine holding on to a house that feels more like a heartbeat than bricks and wood, and being told you have to leave. This isn't just a house. For one boy, it's the last place where his mother's laughter still lingers. And tonight, it will be taken from him. The city was changing fast. Towering skyscrapers stretched higher every month, shadows falling across the few small homes left behind. Developers called it progress. But to the families still living there, it felt like the walls were closing in. In the middle of all that glittering glass and steel stood one weathered home, paint peeling, windows cracked, yet filled with the warmth of love. It belonged to Lucas and his son, Michael. Lucas worked until his hands ached, juggling jobs that barely covered the bills. He never complained, because keeping that roof over Michael's head meant everything. It was the house his late wife had once filled with music, the home where she had taken her last breath. For Michael, just 17, every corner carried her memory. Leaving wasn't an option. It would be like losing her all over again. But somewhere across town, high above the streets in an office of polished glass, Daniel Hayes didn't see it that way. Daniel was a man who measured life in contracts and profits. For him, buying the neighborhood was nothing more than the next step in a growing empire. He didn't see the children playing on the cracked sidewalks. He didn't hear the laughter inside the little houses. To him, they were just properties on paper, plots of land to be cleared for something bigger, shinier, richer. And then came the envelope. A single sheet of paper with bold letters across the top, notice of eviction. Daniel had signed it without a second thought. But the delivery of that letter would not be left to a faceless courier. This time, he sent his son, Aaron. Aaron had grown up in a world far removed from those broken streets. He had never known what it felt like to wonder if dinner would stretch far enough, or to see his father come home exhausted with nothing left to give. To Aaron, hardship was a distant concept. But he wasn't blind to discomfort. Something inside him twisted when his father placed that envelope in his hand. "Do it," Daniel told him, his voice cool, firm, unyielding. "It's just business." Aaron nodded, but deep down, he knew it wasn't just business. Still, he carried the letter, walking down cracked sidewalks he'd never stepped on before, past homes he would never have looked at twice. That's when he saw Michael. Michael stood in the doorway, his face set, his eyes burning with something Aaron had never seen up close, defiance born of desperation. He didn't flinch when Aaron extended the paper. He didn't even look at it. He just stared at the boy in front of him, the son of the man who wanted to take his world away. "You think this house is just wood and nails," Michael said quietly, almost like he was talking to the wind. "But it's my whole life. It's my mom. It's all I have left." The words cut through Aaron like a blade, because in that moment, he realized he wasn't handing over just a letter. He was delivering the first swing of a wrecking ball aimed at someone's soul. And for the first time in his life, Aaron questioned whether following in his father's footsteps was the path he wanted at all. What neither boy knew was how deeply this letter would alter both of their lives. That envelope didn't just mark the end of a family's home. It was the beginning of a story that would test loyalties, tear open hidden wounds, and spark a fight for something far greater than a piece of land. Because behind every eviction notice, there isn't just property. There are people. And sometimes, one house can hold the weight of an entire heart. Aaron couldn't shake Michael's words. They echoed long after he left the doorstep, bouncing around in the quiet of his father's car ride home. He had delivered the notice, yes, but something about the way Michael had spoken, calm, steady, almost unbroken, made him feel as though he had been the one handed a verdict. That night, as Daniel poured himself a glass of expensive wine, Aaron sat across the table, silent. His father went on about investors, projections, and timelines, but Aaron's mind was back in that small, weathered home. He pictured Michael clutching the doorframe, standing firm against something much larger than him. It was so different from the life Aaron knew, where problems were solved with a call, or avoided altogether with money. Lucas, meanwhile, sat with Michael at their kitchen table. The light flickered above them, and bills were stacked in the corner. Lucas tried to reassure his son, even though the eviction notice weighed heavy in his own chest. He knew their options were limited. "We'll figure it out," he whispered, his hand covering Michael's. But the truth was, he had already been working 2 jobs, already stretching himself thin. Moving meant starting over with nothing, and Michael deserved more than that. Michael wasn't ready to surrender. He saw his father's weariness and wanted to be strong for him. "We can fight this," he said with conviction. "This is our home. Mom's home. I won't let them take it." His father gave a faint smile, proud of his boy's spirit, but behind his eyes was a quiet fear he couldn't share. The following day, Aaron found himself driving back to that neighborhood, though he had no reason to be there. Maybe it was guilt. Maybe curiosity. He didn't know. But when he saw Michael sweeping the front steps of the old house, he stopped. For a moment, Aaron just watched. There was something grounding about Michael, someone his age, yet carrying the weight of survival on his shoulders. "Why are you here?" Michael asked when he noticed him. There was no hostility in his voice, only suspicion. Aaron hesitated, then admitted, "I just wanted to see if you were okay." It sounded clumsy, even to his own ears. Michael shook his head, half amused, half frustrated. "People like you don't check if we're okay. You take, and then you leave." His words were sharp, but there was pain under them. Aaron didn't know what to say. He wasn't used to being seen as part of them. Over the next few days, Aaron kept returning. Sometimes he brought food, sometimes he just sat and listened. Michael never fully welcomed him, not at first. Trust wasn't given easily when your life felt under siege. But slowly, piece by piece, their conversations began to stretch longer. Michael shared stories of his mom, how she used to plant flowers in the tiny patch of dirt out front, how she'd sing while cooking so that the whole house filled with warmth. Aaron found himself drawn in. He couldn't remember the last time his own house had felt like that, alive, filled with something deeper than schedules and silence. He realized, painfully, that he had grown up surrounded by abundance, yet starved of connection. Meanwhile, Daniel pressed forward with his plans. Meetings were scheduled, contracts signed. To him, the deal was already done. But Aaron was caught between 2 worlds, one of glossy boardrooms, the other of a fragile home clinging to hope. One evening, as Lucas tucked Michael in, Michael asked softly, "Dad, what if we really do lose this place?" Lucas hesitated, then kissed his son's forehead. "Then we'll carry her memory with us, no matter where we go." But when he stepped out of the room, his face crumpled under the weight of that thought. He knew how much this home meant to Michael. He also knew what losing it might do to him. Back at the Hayes estate, Aaron finally spoke up. "Dad," he began cautiously, "don't you ever think about what happens to the people you move out? Where they go? What they lose?" Daniel didn't look up from his papers. "It's not personal, Aaron. It's progress. They'll adjust." But Aaron had seen Michael's eyes. He knew adjusting wasn't that simple. And as he lay awake that night, he realized something else. Maybe the real battle wasn't just about a house. Maybe it was about whether hearts like his father's could still change, or if, once hardened by power, they stayed that way forever. What Aaron didn't yet know was how quickly events would spiral. And how tragedy, waiting just around the corner, would shake every certainty he thought he had. The days grew heavier for Lucas. Bills piled up, shifts stretched longer, and the uncertainty of tomorrow gnawed at him. He tried to keep his chin up for Michael, but every letter from the landlord, every notice from the city, reminded him that time was running out. His heart carried both love and exhaustion, and though he wanted to be a pillar for his son, cracks had begun to show. Michael sensed it. He noticed how his father's smile came slower, how his shoulders slumped a little more each evening. Yet Michael clung to hope like it was oxygen. "We'll fight this, Dad," he repeated whenever silence felt too long. He believed it, because to stop believing would mean surrendering the last piece of his mother's memory. Aaron, on the other hand, was caught in a quiet storm of his own. He couldn't escape the image of Michael standing in that doorway, defiant, refusing to be broken. The more time Aaron spent with him, the more it unsettled everything he thought he knew about wealth, about power, about what it meant to live. Michael didn't have much, but what he did have, he held onto fiercely, and that kind of strength felt foreign to Aaron. Back in Daniel's world, things looked very different. For him, this was simply another project moving forward. Construction plans were finalized, investors eager, profits already predicted. When Aaron dared to mention the families again, Daniel's answer was sharp and dismissive: "Business doesn't slow down for sentiment." Those words pierced Aaron more deeply than his father realized. Late one night, Lucas sat alone at the kitchen table, the eviction notice resting beside him. He rubbed his chest absent-mindedly, as if the weight inside was growing heavier by the day. The stress pressed down like a vice, though he tried to ignore it. His mind drifted to his wife, the promises he had made to protect their boy, the vow to never let him feel abandoned. Losing the house would feel like breaking that vow. The following morning, as Michael left for school, Lucas collapsed while trying to gather his work things. The pain in his chest grew unbearable, and within moments, neighbors rushed to his side, calling for help. By the time the ambulance arrived, Michael was at his father's side, clutching his hand, begging him to hold on. The world blurred into flashing lights and sirens. Aaron heard about it later that day. A friend from the neighborhood told him Lucas had been rushed to the hospital. Without thinking, Aaron drove there, his heart racing. When he arrived, he found Michael sitting in the waiting room, his face pale, his hands trembling but determined not to cry. Hours stretched into eternity. Finally, a doctor emerged, his expression solemn. "I'm sorry," he said quietly. Lucas hadn't survived. The stress had been too much for his heart. Michael's world shattered in that instant. The boy who had clung so fiercely to hope now sat crumbling, grief flooding through him in silence. He didn't scream. He didn't shout. He just sat, numb, the weight of loss pressing in from all sides. His father, the man who had been everything, was gone. Aaron stood nearby, frozen. He had never seen grief so raw, so immediate. It wasn't the kind of pain you could reason with or fix. It was a wound carved into Michael's soul. And Aaron knew, deep down, that the eviction, the pressure, the endless fight had played its part in this tragedy. His father's decisions had not just displaced families. They had stolen a life. At the funeral, Aaron kept his distance. He watched Michael clutch the casket, whispering words no one else could hear. Neighbors wept, friends offered their condolences, but Michael seemed far away, lost in a storm of his own. Aaron's chest tightened. He wanted to speak, to say something, anything, but what words could heal a loss like this? For the first time, Aaron understood the real cost of his father's empire. It wasn't just land or money. It was people. It was lives. And that realization would mark him forever. But for Michael, grief would not end in silence. Something inside him began to harden, not into bitterness, but into resolve. His father's death would not be for nothing. If they wanted to take the house, they would have to face him, and this time, he would not stand alone. Michael stood outside the house after the funeral, staring at the peeling paint, the worn steps, the place that carried every memory of his father and mother. The silence inside felt unbearable, yet he couldn't bring himself to leave. For him, this wasn't just shelter, it was the last thread connecting him to the people he had lost. And now, more than ever, he vowed he would not let it be taken without a fight. Neighbors began to gather, offering quiet condolences, but Michael's grief soon transformed into determination. "They can't just erase us," he said one evening, his voice trembling but resolute. "This house, this street, all of it matters. We have to stand together." His words carried weight. Slowly, the community, tired of being ignored, began to rally behind him. Aaron watched from the edges of this gathering movement. He knew he didn't belong, not really, but something inside urged him to step forward. He found himself meeting Michael in secret, away from Daniel's watchful eye. "If you want to fight back," Aaron whispered, "you'll need more than anger. You'll need people who can challenge him in ways he won't expect." Michael eyed him with caution. Trust was not easy, especially with the son of the man responsible for so much pain. But there was something in Aaron's voice, a softness, a regret, that made him pause. He gave a slow nod, signaling that for now, he was willing to listen. Together, they began reaching out. Community centers, local advocates, even small legal aid groups. Michael brought the passion, Aaron brought the access. Though he had never stood up to his father before, Aaron quietly sought advice from people who knew the system. The fight was daunting, but for the first time, both boys felt they had a path forward. At home, Daniel remained firm. "Delays cost money," he told his team. "I want the demolition permits cleared by next week." His confidence was absolute, his tone leaving no room for hesitation. But beneath that certainty, Aaron noticed something, a flicker of frustration when news articles began surfacing about the neighborhood's plight. A headline had caught public attention: "Widowed father dies amid eviction battle." The story was spreading, and whispers of protest were beginning to grow louder. Aaron confronted his father again one night at dinner. "People are hurting, Dad. Lucas is gone. Michael's alone. How can you just keep pushing forward like nothing happened?" Daniel set down his glass, his jaw tightening. "You don't understand. This is bigger than one family. Progress means sacrifice." Aaron's voice cracked, though he tried to steady it. Sacrifice shouldn't mean destroying lives. It shouldn't mean a boy burying his father while you break ground for condos. For a moment, Daniel's eyes softened, but just as quickly the hardness returned. "You're young. One day you'll see this clearly." But Aaron had already seen more than his father realized. He had seen Michael fight through grief, seen a community band together with nothing but faith and resilience. And in those moments, Aaron had begun to understand that true strength wasn't measured in contracts or skyscrapers, it was measured in the bonds people refused to let go of. Michael, meanwhile, became the voice of the resistance. Standing before neighbors gathered in the dimly lit church basement, he spoke not with polished words but with raw truth. they think we're powerless. They think we'll just give up. But we are more than property lines. We are families. We are memories. And if we stand together, they can't ignore us. The room erupted in quiet cheers, a flicker of hope sparking in weary faces. Aaron sat in the back, unseen, his chest heavy with a mix of guilt and pride. He knew that sooner or later, his father would discover his involvement. But in that moment, it didn't matter. What mattered was that Michael wasn't alone anymore. And so, two boys from opposite worlds found themselves on the same side of a battle neither had asked for, but both now needed to win. Because for Michael, it was about holding on to the last piece of his family. For Aaron, it was about finally choosing what kind of man he wanted to become. Neither knew just how high the stakes would climb, or how much this fight would demand of them. But one truth had become undeniable: the eviction had started as a business deal. Now, it was a war for the heart of a community and for the soul of a father's legacy. The weeks that followed turned the neighborhood into a battleground not of fists and weapons, but of voices, signatures, and determination. Michael had become the unlikeliest of leaders, his grief transformed into fuel. He organized meetings in living rooms, passed out flyers, and even reached out to local reporters. Each time he spoke, his words carried the weight of his father's absence and the urgency of a community on the edge of being erased. Aaron stood beside him, quietly but firmly. He offered strategies, connected Michael with lawyers willing to take the case pro bono, and began speaking with activists who had fought similar battles in other cities. For the first time in his life, Aaron felt like his actions mattered, not in the abstract world of business deals, but in the lives of people who depended on these homes. But with every step forward, the pressure from Daniel intensified. When articles hit the front page, highlighting Lucas's death and Michael's fight, Daniel stormed into Aaron's room. "You're behind this, aren't you?" His voice wasn't just angry, it was betrayed. "You're sabotaging your own family." Aaron's reply was steady, though his heart pounded. "I'm trying to save someone else's family. Doesn't that count for something?" His father's face darkened. "You think you know better than me? You'll destroy everything I've built." Aaron shook his head. "Maybe what you've built needs to change." That night, Aaron lay awake, replaying the confrontation. Standing up to Daniel felt terrifying, yet liberating. For years, he had lived in his father's shadow, measuring himself against expectations he never chose. But now, with Michael's friendship and the community's courage, he was beginning to find his own voice. Meanwhile, Michael's resolve deepened. One evening, as he walked past his house, he noticed surveyors marking the street. Fresh chalk lines cut across the sidewalk like scars. For a moment, fear gripped him. He was just one boy, how could he stand against all of this? But then he remembered his father's last words, remembered the strength Lucas had shown even as the weight grew unbearable. "We'll carry her memory with us," his father had said. And now Michael knew, carrying that memory meant fighting for the home she had loved. The legal battle took shape. The neighborhood filed an injunction, arguing that Daniel's development plan ignored affordable housing requirements. It was a long shot, but it gave them time. Michael spoke at council meetings, his voice cracking yet powerful, telling city leaders about the night he held his father's hand in the hospital, about how this house wasn't just wood but legacy. Reporters captured his words, and slowly, sympathy began to spread. Aaron, for his part, made a bold move. He leaked documents from his father's firm showing internal discussions about profit margins and deliberate pressure placed on families to leave quickly. It was a risk. If Daniel discovered the betrayal, Aaron's relationship with his father might never recover. But he couldn't stay silent any longer. The more the story spread, the more people began to see Daniel Hayes not as a visionary developer, but as a symbol of cold ambition unchecked by conscience. Public protests grew. News outlets ran headlines tying Lucas's death directly to the mounting stress of the eviction. For the first time, Daniel's empire began to feel unstable. One evening, Aaron and Michael stood together at a candlelight vigil in front of Lucas's home. Neighbors, activists, and strangers who had read the story all came to show support. Michael held a candle, his face illuminated in the soft glow. "This fight isn't just for me," he said to the crowd. "It's for every family who's ever been told they don't matter. For every parent who worked themselves to the bone just to keep a roof overhead. My dad gave everything he had. I'm not letting his sacrifice disappear." The crowd cheered softly, the sound carrying like a promise. Aaron looked at Michael then, seeing not just a boy his own age, but someone who had been forged by loss into something stronger. And deep inside, Aaron knew the outcome of this fight would define not only Michael's future, but his own. Because in standing against his father, Aaron wasn't just trying to save a neighborhood. He was trying to save himself from becoming the very man he feared he was destined to be. But Daniel wasn't finished. Behind closed doors, he prepared his own countermove, determined to crush the resistance before it grew any larger. And in that looming clash between prophet and people, father and son, no one would walk away unchanged. The battle between Daniel Hayes and the neighborhood reached its breaking point. Court dates were set, protests grew louder, and the pressure mounted on every side. Yet in the middle of all the chaos, it was Aaron's voice that finally cut through the noise. At a public hearing, cameras flashing and reporters pressing in, Aaron stepped forward. He spoke not as the heir to his father's fortune, but as a son who had witnessed the cost of unchecked ambition. "A man is gone," he said, his voice steady though his hands trembled. "Lucas Blake lost his life under the weight of this fight. My father calls it progress, but what progress comes from breaking people until there's nothing left? We're not just talking about houses. We're talking about families, memories, and futures. And I will not stand on the side of destruction anymore." The room fell silent. For the first time, Daniel looked unsettled. His son's words echoed with sincerity, and the cameras carried them far beyond those four walls. The story wasn't just local anymore, it was national. Headlines shifted overnight: "Millionaire's son stands with evicted family." Public opinion swayed sharply, and the pressure Daniel once brushed aside now threatened to crumble his carefully built empire. Behind the scenes, investors began pulling back. City leaders, wary of the growing outrage, demanded changes to the project. And after weeks of resistance, Daniel finally conceded. He announced that the development would continue, but with a new plan. Affordable housing would be included, and families from the neighborhood would be given priority in returning. It wasn't the sweeping victory Michael dreamed of, but it was enough to save the community from being erased. Michael stood at the edge of the construction site weeks later, watching as the first repairs, not demolitions, took place. His father's absence still ached every day, but for the first time since that night in the hospital, hope flickered again. This wasn't just survival. It was the beginning of something better. Aaron walked up beside him, quieter than usual. "I don't know what's going to happen with my dad and me," he admitted. "But I know one thing. I couldn't let him take this from you. Not after everything you've already lost." Michael didn't say much in return, just gave a small nod. Sometimes words weren't needed. The two boys stood together, looking out at the street that had once seemed doomed, now buzzing with the sounds of rebuilding. They were from different worlds, yet tied together forever by what had happened here. One had lost a father, the other had defied his. Both had discovered what it meant to choose integrity over comfort. Weeks later, under the quiet shade of a cemetery tree, Michael and Aaron visited Lucas's grave. Michael knelt, placing fresh flowers down gently. "We're still here, Dad," he whispered. "We didn't give up." Beside him, Aaron lowered his head in respect. For a moment, silence spoke louder than any speech could. This story began with an eviction notice, a simple letter meant to end a family's home. But it became so much more. It became a fight for dignity, a confrontation between power and compassion, and a reminder that even the coldest walls can crack when love and courage push hard enough. And maybe, just maybe, it showed that redemption is possible. Not given, but earned through sacrifice, through truth, through choosing to stand on the side of what is right, even when it costs you everything. If this story touched you, let it be a gentle reminder: behind every door is a story worth hearing, behind every face is a struggle we may never see. And sometimes, one act of empathy can change everything. If you believe in stories like this, stories of resilience, healing, and hope, consider joining our community. Subscribe, so you don't miss the next journey. Because together, we can keep sharing voices that remind us all of what truly matters.